The title of my unit plan is U.S. Involvement in World War II, the War in the Pacific. In this unit, I'll be teaching students about America's entrance into World War II, specifically how they transitioned from being an isolationist country into full-on involvement in the war. And the main focus of this unit is going to be placed on the war in the Pacific. This unit plan is for 11th grade United States History and Geography, Continuity and Change in the 20th Century, and I'll be focusing on California State Content Standards for Social Studies 11.7, where students will analyze America's participation in World War II. The substandards of this are 11.7.1, 11.7.2, and 11.7.7 that I'll be focusing on in my lectures and activities. The big ideas for this lesson plan are how America became involved in the war and the events that led to the attack on Pearl Harbor, which coincides with California State Content Standard 11.7.1. I'll also be focusing on what the strategies were of the major battles of Midway, Normandy, Okinawa, and the Battle of the Bulge. And I want to focus on the significance of each of those battles. This coincides with the content standards for 11.7.2. And finally, I'll have students weigh the factors that played into the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I want them to think about the consequences and whether or not they think that it was a necessary decision of the war. And this big idea coincides with content standard 11.7.7. The student learning outcomes for this unit are that students will be able to describe the events that led to the attack on Pearl Harbor and America's entrance into World War II with a minimum of 80% accuracy, which I will assess with a quiz in class. And students will also be able to relay the significance of each battle in the Pacific. And students will also be able to provide 3 key pieces of evidence to support their position on the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. And below here at the bottom, I have a link to go to my teacher website. So if you click that, it takes students to my teacher website for the class itself. Next, I'll be showing you my lesson 1. This will be the lecture that I created to start this unit with. I have provided a guided notes page beneath this. It's designed to flow with the slides in the presentation for my lecture. Students can choose to fill this out as we go on in the lecture, or they can fill it out later. But it's designed to be a study tool for them to prepare for exams. In the lecture, I'll be covering topics about the road to Pearl Harbor, which was where America entered World War II. I'll be focusing on the Japanese aggression in Asia and concepts like the 21 demands and the open door policy. And I will be asking students how those two concepts conflicted with each other. And next, I'll talk about the economic problems in Japan. I will be discussing the invasion of Manchuria and the United States' response to that. We will cover the Second Sino-Japanese War, and namely the Marco Polo Bridge incident and the rape of Nanking, and also the United States' response to Japan's actions in China. We'll cover the Japanese invasion of French Indochina and the United States' response. And I will also be asking questions along the way about American foreign policy. I want to see what my students think about the effectiveness of U.S. foreign policy in Asia in the 1930s and overall during the war. And I'm going to be focusing on Japan's efforts and ideas about diplomacy with the United States before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then we'll wrap it up with the attack and focus on the planner of the attack, Isiroko Yamamoto, a question about him and his personal life, the Japanese objectives of the attack, the results in the aftermath of the attack, as well as I've included a video clip of President Roosevelt declaring war on Japan. And then finally, I want to end this lesson with by asking my students, do you think that the war between the United States and Japan was inevitable, or could it have been avoided? The next lesson that I have planned is a Weber size. This will be a timeline project where students will work both individually and in groups. I've designed this to be a jigsaw exercise where one student will be the expert of their battle that they are assigned. They will do research using the links that I have provided for them. They will also be responsible for providing one additional link that they find themselves to help build their research skills. And they will be creating a slide for the timeline. So each student will create their own slide for their personal battle. They will be considered the expert for their battle in their group. I've also included a note-taking guide for students while they're doing their research, and short videos on their battles just to give them an idea of the main concepts that I will be looking for in their slides. But students will consider the questions like who, what, when, where, and why is it significant is what I'm going to be looking for in their slides. And after they have conducted their research, they have become experts on their battle, students will be assigned to working groups. And each student will be the expert for their own battle. They will create their slide for their timeline, and then as a group, they will create the timeline and present to the class. This will also be a formative assessment for me to see how students are learning about the major battles in the war in the Pacific. And then lesson 3, I have created a graphic organizer. This lesson will be focused on the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan and the debate on this event that still occurs to this day. That is something that I really want to highlight to my students, that this debate is still ongoing and is very controversial. So with this graphic organizer, I've included directions and a brief introduction. The students will work on this individually. I've provided links for them to do independent research. Links include overviews of information on the event. There is also a documentary, and which includes personal testimonies of survivors, and there is also a link that covers several well-known historians and their views on the debate. Students will be filling out a decision-making graph that weigh the pros and cons of the factors that went into the ultimate decision to drop the bombs. And then they will also be providing alternative options to dropping the bombs and weigh the pros and cons of those options. The main alternative that I will be looking for my students is this alternative to carry out the planned Operation Downfall and invade Japan. I will be looking for that one specifically because Operation Downfall was replaced by the decision to drop the bombs. So that was a alternative that had already been planned, and so that is the major focus of this section. And at the end, students will be asked to take a side of the debate and decide whether they are for or against the decision. And they will later expand on this in another assessment. So the assessments that I have planned for this unit, I've created an entry-level assessment to mark the next step in the unit before each lesson. So I've included I plan to use a video discussion before lecture 1, a survey about the battles, where students will list all of the battles in the War in the Pacific that they've heard of before lesson 2, and then I will segue into the difficult discussion of the atomic bombs with a question of how the students think that the War in the Pacific ended. As far as formative assessments go, after the lesson 1 instructor lecture, I'll be conducting a Kahoot quiz online that covers the concepts and the events that led to the attack on Pearl Harbor and America's entrance into World War II. And this quiz will be based on the lecture and any notes that they've taken, although notes will not be allowed while taking the quiz. As I said previously, the timeline project will be used as a formative assessment to monitor student progress and their knowledge of the major battles in the War in the Pacific. And after lesson 2, I will create my own Quizlet match that focus on the key points of each battle, namely the location, date, strategy, the people involved, and the outcome, and the significance of that battle. So that is something that I will create for my students as a fun study tool as well as a formative assessment. And the graphic organizer mentioned in lesson 3 will serve as a progress tracking formative assessment for research and their understanding of a controversial debate. And then after students have made their decision and taken a side in the debate, we will have a class debate where I will divide the class into pros and cons, and students will debate the event as if they were historians. And the summative assessment that I've chosen for lesson 3 will be a formal essay on the bomb. So after the class debate, it is likely that some students may change their mind about their position in the debate. So I assign this essay as a chance for students to explain their true feelings. It's also not likely that all students will be able to fully explain themselves in a large class debate. So this essay will allow them to speak their mind and develop their writing skills and to discuss their position and to support it with evidence that they have found through their research. And then the last summative assessment that I'll be using will be a unit exam, which will be formal and graded and cover all of the material from the course of the unit, including lectures, activities, and discussions. And under this, I have included my Kahoot quiz. So if you click on this link, I've created this quiz myself. So you go to kahoot.it on your cell phone or a mobile device, including a tablet. So this will be a quiz that I will conduct in class. Students will put the game pin in and choose a username. I will have them use their school ID number, and they will answer the questions, and we will get the results in class. And this is great because I'll be able to see the students' results, and they will be able to see their own results, and students will also be able to give me feedback on the quiz. And then below this, I have the instructions and a rough outline of my expectations for the essay on the historical debate. And I've included a rubric underneath for students to follow. And finally, I have additional unit resources for students, links for study tools and more information about Pearl Harbor. I've included the battle videos for students to increase their knowledge of the battles of the War in the Pacific, and additional resources for information on the atomic bombs, and resources for completing assignments, a note-taking guide, the time glider timeline, and also a T-chart template for taking notes. And the last page that I have is my lesson plan template and screencast.